You are listening to the Small Town Big Arts podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner, the CEO of the Academy Center of the Arts in Lynchburg, Virginia. In my own work as an arts leader, I have found it difficult to access resources for arts organizations and artists serving smaller communities. On each episode, Small Town Big Arts sets out to drive conversations and provide inspiration for those serving smaller communities through the arts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us and share with your friends and colleagues who are working to promote the arts in smaller communities across America. You can also learn more by visiting us at smalltownbigarts.com. Just as a preface to the beginning of this podcast, you may hear some sounds at the beginning of the podcast interview, some poor audio quality moments. That was a couple of very adorable dogs getting into a peanut butter jar. So, as you're listening to the interview, it's in the first 15 minutes or so of the interview. Just hang tight. What our guest has to share is worth sticking through and listening to, and enjoy the podcast. Today's guest is Kristen Williams, the executive director of Riverzedge Arts in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, a really incredible organization. Riverzedge was formed in 2002 by artists, youth development professionals, and community leaders concerned about patterns of violence among disaffected youth in the wake of the Columbine shootings. Riverzedge is built on the philosophy that art is a powerful force for social change, and that creative entrepreneurship through the arts is a productive and life-changing opportunity for teens. Riverzedge has garnered national attention and awards for the academic success and artistic achievements of their youth, and for their consistent performance and innovative approaches to youth development. In November 2013, the Wallace Foundation cited Riverzedge as one of 8 exemplary organizations nationwide in their research on out-of-school time arts programs for low-income urban teens. Riverzedge also was awarded a President's Council on the Arts and Humanities National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Award in 2010, and MetLife After School Alliance After School Innovator Award in 2009. A bit about Woonsocket, Rhode Island, a city in Providence County, Rhode Island, with a population of about 43,000 according to the 2020 census. It is Rhode Island's northernmost city and lies directly south of the Massachusetts state line, and constitutes as part of the Providence metropolitan area with a population of about 1.5 million. And we'll talk a little bit about that too in relationship to the smaller community that Woonsocket resides in. The city is the corporate headquarters also of CVS Health. And let's learn a little bit about our guest, Executive Director Kristen Williams. Trained as a theater practitioner and an academic, Kristen has been by turns a director and playwright, a published poet, and a college professor. She holds degrees in theater, English, and American Studies from Rhode Island College, the University of Toronto, and the University of Maryland College Park. Coming of age in the do-it-yourself punk rock scenes of Providence and Northern Rhode Island, Kristen believes strongly in the power of creativity to draw out and amplify the unique strengths of people, landscapes, and the cultures to produce powerful and healthy communities. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for talking nicely about Riverzedge. We think it's pretty cool.
It is a fantastic organization. What's been really great about doing these podcasts is I get a chance to really dive into all these really amazing organizations, and I just was continually impressed by all I was reading and all I was seeing. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. So to begin, tell me a little bit about Woonsocket in your own words, right? I mean, obviously, I pulled stats that came from an online source. You're a smaller city with a relationship with both the greater areas of Providence, but also Boston. So tell me a little bit about where you are and the community you serve.
Sure. So for someone like me who grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island, which is pretty centrally located, someplace like Woonsocket or someplace like Northern Rhode Island is actually really accessible to Boston, to New York, to DC, to all these places. But that's not true if you're a low income person. And that describes most of the folks in Woonsocket, and it definitely describes most of the youth. To sort of add to some of the data that you were mentioning, the Rhode Island Kids Count organization does a yearly update of basically they take the community survey, the American Community Survey, they take the census data, and then they add additional data to it, and they publish a book every year, the Kids Count Data Fact Book. And I wanted to sort of bring that up because it's one of the main pieces of information that we all look at. And when I say we, I mean like the nonprofit sector that's serving youth. And according to them, the situation in Woonsocket is pretty dire, and has been for a long time. When we started in 2002, the graduation rate was the lowest in the state. That's not true anymore, which is great. Um, our suspension rate is incredibly high, and that's something that I'm really proud to say the school department has really started to work on. They're very much committed to doing some restorative justice training, and they've got most of their staff and faculty now trained in restorative justice, and that's the first step. The next step is, of course, implementing it, and that's trying to offer a sort of an alternative to suspension. So that's good news. However, 37% of youth live in poverty, and there's about 10,000 kids in Woonsocket. And so when you think about the sort of numbers, there's really no reason for some of these problems. 10,000 kids, we should be able to do something about. There are a number of really great organizations, particularly after school and out of school time organizations in Woonsocket, that work together to try to basically change that climate. And the expectations, I think that at this point we now know that the numbers for youth generally, if they're bad, are especially bad for BIPOC and multi-language learning youth. And we do have a number of immigrant communities in Woonsocket. Woonsocket's got a long, storied immigrant past, French Canadian for sure, and then we have a massive group of Irish that came in to work on the canals because we're in the Blackstone River Heritage Valley. We're one of the more sort of southern locations of the Blackstone River. So you have that. Now, the main thing that in the 19th and early 20th century, all those immigrant populations had in common was that they were all Catholic. So they did have something in common, but now there's a lot of cultural divergence. Now we have a pretty significant number of African immigrants from multiple different countries, but many of them are French speaking. We have Portuguese folks, and we also have a large Southeast Asian population. So when we're recruiting, when we're looking at places and ways to get populations engaged, we're not just looking at like the high school. You've got to go to the temples, you've got to go to the mosques, you've got to go to the barbershops, you've got to go to a lot of different places. So I mentioned that because that speaks to, sort of the kind of city that it is.
You
I
know,
also,
it's oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead. I just say it's so interesting. You're bringing up this interesting point. I want to touch back on that. How the church used to be a unifying factor in the
yeah,
town, and now that has right that the town is diversifying, and that's no longer there. That's a really interesting. That's really interesting, and I'm sure a lot of small communities are finding that their demographics are changing,
yeah, I
shifting.
think so. I mean, affinity groups are really important. A group I was just talking to from Ann Arbor, Michigan, I was talking to the Neutral Zone yesterday, and their executive director, Lori Robbie, was saying that one of the things one of the main points of touchstones of their programming is affinity groups that might be, that by their own self-identification have come together because of common cause. And that's fascinating. And that's really where I think you have a lot of the folks that learn to do advocacy and that learn to find a safe space in which they can function, particularly important for young folks. But if you can't identify an affinity, or you can't come out and state what that identity is around which you want to claim an affinity, it can be very challenging. One of the things that has it's always been a bit true in the arts, in that LGBTQ plus folks there's often that stereotype that they're going to feel more comfortable in artistic environments, and sure, absolutely, why not? Definitely, I was introduced to the queer community very early because of my interest in punk rock and art and all that,
Yeah.
but for sure, it's become increasingly so at Riverzedge. We're seeing where it used to be maybe 2% of gender non-binary kids or LGBTQ plus kids. Now we're seeing anywhere between 10 and 15% of our youth identifying that way. And I think that speaks to safety and a willingness to be visible. But I also think it speaks to an increase in their willingness to come to a place that has been identified by others as a safe space. So basically, we are ourselves a sort of affinity organization. So yeah, cultural touchstones are really important, I think, to communities. Another word about Woonsocket, I grew up loving it. I grew up loving its industrial architecture. It's got these beautiful railroad tracks that, speak to its wonderful past. It's got a gorgeous main street that we could never afford to change it or tear it down. So there it stands.
Yeah.
And so, trying to make it useful again, that's the key. But the architecture is absolutely stunning. And people rightly take pride in that. We have murals on the side of buildings that still say Bienvenue. That's amazing. And it speaks to a kind of connection to ethnic heritage that is not necessarily seen everywhere in America. In Rhode Island, you don't ask where the bakery is. You ask where the Portuguese bakery is. You ask where the Italian
Huh,
bakery is. You ask where
interesting.
the French bakery is. So that is still very much a thing in Rhode Island, where when I've lived other places, particularly the Midwest, that was not a thing. I would say, where are you people from? And they would say, what do you mean? America. So,
Yeah.
whereas in Rhode Island, that still doesn't so much happen. So I think Woonsocket's got a rich cultural heritage. It's got a rich immigrant heritage. It's got a beautiful architectural past to look to, including the churches. But a lot of disenfranchisement, a lot of disinvestment. It was never the city. It never recovered from the loss of the textile industry. It never recovered from not being a train stop, on that sort of East Coast rail. So there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of sense of disinvestment among the community, and saying, hey, why don't we count? And so that's I think a thing that's really important. So there's both a pride and a parochialism sometimes about Woonsocket, where we're going to turn something into like, oh, you don't like Woonsocket, you think it's gross and dirty, well, we like it, we're proud of it. On the
Yeah.
other hand, within our community, people go, gosh, it's so dirty and gross, I hate you know
Yeah.
so there's that element. So that's where we are, and we're proud of it. We're not there by accident.
So Chris, are you originally from Woonsocket? Is that
No,
your?
I'm from Warwick, but because most of the punk community was located up there, that's kind of where my identity was formed, was
Okay.
sort of walking around. And you learn a city really well when you have to walk, because you can't drive yet because it's not legal.
Right. 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 Yeah, so you've actually, answered a lot of my next question, but we'll use it a little bit to expand a bit. And this is, why your current services, at their core are really important. And I mean, you've stated some reasons why, clearly it is, I think in terms of the demographic shift that you have there. Um, and it's such an interesting point that you bring up too, this notion. And I found this very often in conversations with folks that are serving rural communities, right? That we can even if the rural community is in relationship to a larger urban center, if you're poor and you don't have means, you're not going there, right? And I think that's a thing that can be very often forgotten by many, that this is there still are access problems even if you were, just a few miles away, right? That isolation and that the importance of having something localized is really a great point to be made. I you mentioned the poverty line and the number of folks that are operating or living in poverty there. And one of the things that I want to talk a little bit about your services too, so we can begin to explain to listeners about what you do, because it's really special in that you're providing workforce training. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how that manifests itself through things like design and multimedia and public art. But you're also providing income for the participants, for the youth participants, and I think this is a really special, important element of the organization. So talk to me a little bit about the services and how they do intersect with that diverse community that you are serving there.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. That was a good overview. We are, as the name implies, an arts organization, but I will tell you what I tell funders when they say, well, we don't really fund the arts and culture. And I'll say, well, that's okay, because that's not what we do. So what we do is, and the impact that we produce is a bit different than the strategies we use to do it. If we are trying to, and this is what we were trying to do in 2002, is reduce youth violence, and increase youth investment in school, make sure that they did well academically, and most of all, that they showed up. Because anyone who's ever taught college knows that showing up is part of the important game. You can't just read the PowerPoints, it will
Yeah.
not help you.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so in that particular sort of instance, what we are really interested in doing is we do work very, very closely with schools, with the Woonsocket Education Department, with other schools in the area as we recruit youth throughout Northern Rhode Island. But the main sort of thing that we do is workforce training and education. We want to train entrepreneurs. We want to train youth with an entrepreneurial spirit, and we want them to learn transferable skills so that because most of them will not go on to be artists. That's fine. We're happy to prepare you for art school. We're happy to prepare you for a career in the arts. We're using industry standard skills. So if you're coming to us, you're learning Adobe, you're learning the entire Creative Cloud, you're learning CNC machines and fabrication. You're learning these things from us. However, we don't expect you to go on in the arts. We are happy to be producing engineers and mathematicians and folks who want to be woodworkers and people who do fabrication in factories. We do have still a fair chunk of factories, small family run factories in the Northern Rhode Island area. I know because I've just been to meet a whole bunch of them because I wanted to get to know the for profit community a little bit better. Um, and that dovetails with sort of why, because we are unique. Well, we are a social enterprise. We're not just a social service organization, and that's awesome if that's what someone is, but so no shade on that, but that's just not who we are. What we're trying to do is provide social service, but also to be an art and design service provider to our region. So
Yeah,
someone who just
great. Which I'll just say really quickly, coming from a smaller community right now, how many times, right, are organizations, people asking for these very services you're providing, but it may be outside the realm of their financial ability to afford it at a professional level. And so, yeah, it's meeting two needs, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, and that's also one of the reasons we love to have. We like to host parent nights or guardian nights or just like kinship circle nights because that gives us a chance to reach adults. The youth then also become voices of authority. They get to teach the parent how to do Adobe. They get to explain their work and becoming a voice of authority, becoming a voice who that can teach others is incredibly empowering. And most people really love to talk about what they know, and kids are no exception. So we definitely cultivate that. So at River's Edge, what we're particularly what we're very proud of is the fact that we pay our youth participants. We don't exactly call them employees, but that's what they are. They get W-2s, they pay taxes, all that good stuff. They're in our payroll system. And the reason that we do this, even though technically when we started we did stipends, and we could still do that, the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training is fine with doing stipends, but we have committed to spending anywhere at this point between 150 and 200 plus $1,000 in wages annually to youth. They earn age appropriate minimum wage. Unless they become mentors. If they become a studio mentor through skill acquisition and sort of evaluation from their studio director, then they become mentors and they earn minimum wage no matter what their age. The goal behind this is twofold. One, the youth learn that they have to, like, we're allowed to hold them responsible for things. They learn accountability. When youth are coming to take part in our art studios, whether it's media arts, graphic design, whether they're working in our wood shop studio, or they're screen printing, or they're doing, I think that was, public art, which is like large scale murals, sculptures, etc., anything meant for like outdoor public consumption. Whatever they're doing, they don't just get to make the art. They have to learn how to, if they're going to screen print, they have to learn how to make a screen print frame. They have to learn how to cut the screen. They have to learn how to wash the screen and clean the screen. They have to mix their own inks. They have to do the labor that's involved with cleaning the studio and maintaining the studio because we're trying to teach them responsibility. They're also responsible for cleaning our building. I get calls all the time. Hey, would you like to hire a cleaning service? And I said, no, we have children. Um, because because they are responsible for making sure that the space that they occupy is a good condition. I'll do the big stuff. I'll make sure that the building, has a great roof and, is warm and all of that. That's on us. We have a nice historic building from 1938. We got to keep it, up to date so that they can be proud of it, but they have to make sure that they're invested in taking care of it and the individual studios. So every day we have cleaning time, about 15 minutes, just like every day we have a warm-up time of 15 minutes where you come in, you get settled, and by the way, our kids don't show up late. If they show up late, they get made fun of by the other kids.
Oh
So
wow.
Yeah, so it works out really
How
well.
how has that been established? Just out of curiosity. I mean,
It's been
obviously that's a
established.
culture that takes time.
It
So,
does take time. We are really proud of the fact that the youth, like we're a restorative practice organization. There's no punitive discipline or anything like that. If someone commits an infraction, and an infraction is really defined as something that's straight up illegal, in terms of like general Rhode Island employment or federal employment regulations. But there's also like violations of the norms in each of the studios, which the youth create and vote on and establish, and can change if they feel they need to. So between the cultural norms that get set by the youth and the actual, legal things that I have to enforce as the executive director, generally speaking, the youth are teaching each other what is appropriate, because they're very protective of their space. They will say, we generally hear, this is like one of the only safe spaces I occupy. This is a great place for me to come and feel like I can totally express myself. So if somebody, you know, doesn't care for the building or doesn't care for their fellow coworker, the kids have a problem with that, and they will generally settle it between themselves with appropriate mediation. And when I say settle it, we've had kids who have gotten in fights in school, but they get along fine at Riverzedge Arts,
oh, interesting.
because we're like, well, you simply cannot work here if you're going to create a hostile work environment for your coworker. So they learn to figure it out, and the other youth hold them accountable for that. If you're disturbing the work of the studio and you can't, we can't get our work done, that's a problem. So they actually end up doing a pretty good job. We don't, of course, we're not going to encourage bullying. We don't encourage name calling. No, you don't call someone out of name or anything like that. But you can say, hey, you're disrupting my work and I don't appreciate it. Why don't we talk about it? And so that is what generally happens. If someone does commit an infraction, we talk about it with them, and they will usually, and it's resolved on the whole in the whole studio, particularly if it happened in front of the whole studio. The idea is to like keep it a nice, safe, happy place for everybody. And if that gets, but not at the expense of what's real. Like they need to be able to come and talk about stuff that's happening in their worlds, as long as they do it respectfully and they do it showing respect to each other and to the staff. Then there's nothing we won't talk about. There's nothing that the youth can't bring up to us.
That's awesome. So I want to talk a little bit too about, one of the things that I really appreciated. You mentioned the older town and or the town aging, right? And I know that a lot of smaller towns, right, these the city centers, the cores of the cities, these downtowns, right, that need to be revitalized. And you mentioned mural art. And I certainly know in my locale and even smaller locales around us, right, there's a lot of interest in addressing the blight that kind of comes with the decay or lost industry within a sector, with murals, right? This is a great tool. So I love this too. That not only, right, are the youth getting all this that you've just described, right, that they're um, I mean, I love this fact that they're sort of self-disciplining each other. They have work. They're gaining skill sets, but they're also providing, it sounds like, the town some really critical artwork that's going to make is making a difference. I imagine I saw a recent project that was at a health facility. Correct? It was outside a waiting area there. Um, so speak to me a little bit about that, because I think that's so interesting. I mean, obviously there, and I and a common I we very so at my organization, we practice a lot of intersection with social service organizations quite a bit, and we do talk a lot in a similar frame that, like, we are larger than the arts, right? What we're doing is bigger than that, right? This is community betterment, and it intersects with all these other organizations, and the arts are simply a tool for doing something larger, right? And so I love this notion that, we're doing all this stuff with the kids, but then the community is benefiting beyond the youth. So maybe share a little bit more too, how that is. I mean, because I imagine too that things like mural art, I'm sure design projects, graphic design work like that, right? It's making that more accessible, probably, I imagine, to the wider community. Correct?
Yes. So one of the things we're most proud of is the fact that while we do have earned income, again, as a social enterprise, we do have earned income from private clients, and that's great. Someone just needs a logo. They don't really care who makes it for them, but if a local kid can do it, so much the better. Great. We're happy to have those clients, but we're also really excited to have projects that we do with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, with the Rhode Island Department of Health, with Thunder Mist, the one that you were referencing, the project that's outside. We took an old loading bay and turned it into a seating area. The idea behind it was exactly what you're addressing, the notion of blight. This old loading bay was something that people had. We have a large homeless population in Woonsocket, and people were using it as essentially a public bathroom, as a place to sleep overnight, etc. Now the idea was not to make it so that people weren't welcome there, but it is facing a main road, so you're not going to be really able to stay there anyway because the police are also across the street, so that's not really a favorable sleeping location. So what we did was, at the behest of Thunder Mist, we went ahead and created English, Spanish, and Portuguese translations that we etched into, like using the way that when you go to a national park, I do a lot of camping. Whenever you go to a place like that, there's a sign that has sort of rounded lettering in it. There's just basically this generic national park lettering. Well, we did that with saying that health is for everyone, wellness is for everyone, you're welcome here, and we put it in multiple languages and carved it into the benches. The youth helped make those benches. The youth helped design those benches. One of the things that I'm very proud of at Riverzedge is it's not that the kids are used for grunt labor. They are involved in every part of the design and fabrication process. They go from conceptualization to installation. And so we make sure that any project that we have can be fully addressed pedagogically. And so with the Thunder Mist project and with other projects that like the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management or the Department of Health, we bring in experts to work with the youth on content first so that they understand the project that they're working on. They understand why it's significant. They understand the impact that it's supposed to have. So we do that research. We bring in these, again, different community voices of authority, different community stakeholders. The youth interface with them. They ask questions. And then that produces the storyboards and the concepts. And then they send those concepts or drafts to the client okays them, and then we start with the fabrication, and then we go through to installation. So in the case of the Rhode Island Department of Health, we worked with them throughout COVID to make billboards. We had one of the things I'm sort of proudest of is that we had a youth who came in with absolutely no art experience, no computer, no graphic design experience, and she put together one of the most successful billboards that we did. And how many times does a 16-year-old get to make a billboard that they see like up on the side of the highway?
It's
That's
amazing. Yeah,
phenomenal, right?
yeah.
So yeah, so again, we did those, and I used to work largely with international students. So one of the things that I asked the youth to do when they were responding to that process, to that particular project, was to keep in mind that we needed to do infographics, that maybe we could make it as visual as possible to share information about what PPP you should wear and how COVID spread and what the importance of vaccination was, because we did 3 different series of billboards. Some of them were funded entirely by the Department of Health, and some of them Blue Cross Blue Shield Rhode Island chipped in on because they thought it was so important. So on the one hand, the youth who don't get to vote, they don't feel like they have a lot of say in things. They got to make public statements. They got to have some influence. One of the questions I kept getting asked during COVID was, how difficult is it to get the youth to keep their masks on? And I said, it's not difficult at all. It's difficult for their parents to keep the masks on. Because the youth kept reporting that they were so frustrated with adults who would not just stick with a program and end this thing. Um, so the youth they were on task with it. So that was a really cool project, and we do try to make it so that they complete as many I call them civic facing projects as possible, because we want them to be engaged. Right now we have maybe a core group of 10 to 20 youth, almost all of them female, in Woonsocket, who always volunteer, who always are volunteering for some kind of public interaction, public engagement. Our kids in the arts are often really quiet and reserved, and they don't necessarily want to come out. And testify on a bill or do a march or something. Some of them do, but some of them don't. And we really think it's important for them to have multiple ways to engage in the world. And we actually taught that to a middle school camp as well. That they chose to do. We had to take a group of four different groups of 10 kids in middle school and asked them to create one mural, and oh my goodness, they did it. I was so impressed because you can't get adults to order Chinese food off a menu when there's only seven of them. But here, these kids, all of them got together and said, okay, we're going to do a Black Lives Matter mural. And one girl just was so stuck on unicorns. Everything was just unicorns and pastel and glitter. And you know what? They made it happen because they did a Black Lives Matter mural with one kid holding a cell phone that had a unicorn cover on it. So talk about compromise. So I love the idea that we have this pedagogical piece, we have the peer piece where they're learning to work together and collaborate, and then we have that external facing civic nature of the project piece. They have to engage in the larger world because they are the larger world.
Yeah, that's great. You know, we've spent, obviously, and it's core to what you do, a lot of time talking about the students and the work that they do, but obviously you have teaching artists, and as well as an artistic director that is leading this, is supporting them in their work that they're doing, and is obviously a part of your workforce. Speak a little bit about how many teaching artists you need to execute a program like this, because clearly the youth are generating so much of the work itself, right? So they're a big part of that workforce, for lack of a better way of describing them. So what does that mentor peer workforce look like?
So right now, if we keep the ratio low of youth to adult permanent staff. So in every studio, we have a studio director that's a teaching artist. Every artist that I hire has to have either a degree in the arts or commensurate professional experience. We don't live and die by degrees, but both myself and the artistic director have terminal degrees. And one of the reasons that's really helpful is because that means that we can create and sort of be recognized as able to create curriculum that aligns with the Common Core, and we can serve as teachers of record on things. So that's important. However, most of our staff either have bachelor's degrees or BFAs, a couple have MFAs. The most important thing that we do, I think, is provide good employment to artists. When Riverzedge started, the ideal really was to have um, the only full-time position was an executive director. Everyone else was part-time. It was all teaching artists, and the teaching artists were all part-time because they were expected that they would be part of the gig economy, right? They're all professional artists, so they're going to teach part-time and at Riverzedge, and they're going to have their own practice privately. But that was maybe fine in 2002, although I would argue that there's plenty of data that says it wasn't. um, it's not fine now. People need health insurance. People need, some benefits. They need 401ks. They need these things, and quite frankly, they're deserving and entitled of those things. Majoring in art should not mean that you vote yourself off the island. Like, we're all part of this ecosystem. So when I came in 3 years ago, it was really important to me to create as many full-time positions as possible. So now we have 6 full-time positions and 3 part-time positions. The 6 full-time positions, one of them is, sorry, 2 of them are administrative. That's me and the communications person that we just hired this year. And then we have the artistic director who also runs the public art studio, and he has an MFA in painting from RISD. We have the screen printer, our master screen printer has an MFA in photography and screen printing. I want to say she went to Mass MoCA, but I can't remember. And then we have a media arts videographer who's kind of like amazing at lots of different things. And she has been a professional artist and fabricator as well for years. She's full time. Our graphic design person is part time. um, and every position is split 80-20. So 80% is them doing their teaching artist thing in the classroom or in the studio, and 20% is administrative to support the organization. So media arts is going to be 80% in the classroom, 80% maybe say like doing something like running our newest NEA project, which is opening in November, and that's exciting. But she's also managing our social media platform, doing all of our visual storytelling, and overseeing her kids, who are overseeing our TikTok. So, and then we have so like the public art person, like I say, is Brad. So Brad Fessmeyer, who has a long and storied history with the organization, is, with us as the artistic director, overseeing all of the content, all of the anything that comes in or out. I say talk to Brad, because that's going to be how we make sure that everything stays of highest quality, that it's curation worthy. We're
Mm.
having a gallery night that's coming up later this month, and that's one of those things. It's like I help plan everything, but I hand it off entirely to him because he basically is the jury in the juried art thing. And then we have, the screen printer who does our retail. We have a small retail empire, and she's going to make all the apparel. She's going to oversee the youth making the apparel. She's going to look at where we place the apparel. So basically, that's kind of the way it works. And that trying to make it so that they have job security, they have good benefits. We're always trying to make more, but that they also have, and they're always one foot in all of the administration. I do not think it's appropriate for this ridiculous binary between admin staff and program staff in an organization our size, where all of us are very much committed to the mission and to youth development. I don't want to hear I'm not interested in fund development from an artist, nor do I want to hear I'm not interested in that project from a communications person. Oh,
Yeah.
you'll be interested in it or you won't be here,
Yeah.
because
Makes a
this
lot
is
of
what
sense.
we need to create a holistic ecosystem, because that's the only way it functions.
That makes a lot of sense. So often in these conversations, I kind of touch base too on in smaller communities, sometimes it can be, staff, retention and staff recruitment can be difficult. As an outsider, sort of looking at where you're situated and having large metropolitan areas around you, I yeah, it doesn't. In some ways, as we earlier discussed, it is isolated for some, right? Are you? Is that a concern for you all where you're situated? Are your teaching artists or your staff living there in Woonsocket, or are they coming from the outside?
No, my staff and I, we consider the weakest part of our organization the fact that we don't have enough employees or board members who are directly from our city.
Mm,
That's something that's very important to us. And one of the main things I've been kicking around lately, and interviewing a lot of other organizations around the country and probably in England too, when it comes to it, is placing youth on the board. Not an advisory board, not
interesting.
just a non voting member, but like on the board.
Huh.
And that's one of the reasons why. On the one hand, I never want to put someone someplace to fill a quota, but we want to make sure that we are paying attention to, like I don't want it to turn into something, well, we have to have 3 people from Woonsocket and we have to have 2 people who are this and 2 people who are that. We want to make sure we're doing the best that we can to get the most that we can for our youth
Hmm.
and their families. So I think that one of the constant struggles that we have is a pipeline. A succession plan is really important for board and for staff, and a lot of small organizations, and we're no exception, really struggle with that. We don't have that, and that's something that needs to be attended to, which is part of my strategic planning. We also have the issue of, as you were saying, hiring people. To come out to Woonsocket is no small thing. I drive 45 minutes every day. Our artistic director drives about an hour from the East Bay every day to come out to where we work, because we do have reasons for being rooted in the communities we're in. But we recognize that. So you can't work at Riverzedge unless you have a car, usually. Although we do have a couple of folks who take the bus, one who does live in Woonsocket and uses a scooter. But generally speaking, we do consider that to be a weak part of the organization. I want to be clear about that, because I think
Yeah.
other organizations that are very rooted in their community, that's a strength, even if it does mean sometimes you can have trouble recruiting from outside. We have no trouble recruiting from outside. Volunteers are a problem. One of the things I'm not able to make a lot of use of are volunteers, because it's inconvenient to get to us, be it for board meetings or a painting project in the hallway, or attending the rain garden in front, or the community garden in the back, these kind of things. That can be really challenging. In other places that I've worked, we've been able to get a lot of interns and support for programs through Brown University, through the Swearer Center. I mean, we have so many higher educational institutions in Rhode Island, but we have a lot of trouble making use of them for personnel, or for sort of program support in the form of humans, because people just can't get to us, particularly youth students and all of that kind of stuff. They can't get to us. It's multiple bus rides, and the bus system in Rhode Island is lacking.
Mm.
And the state is a funny shape. We're really small, so people say, "How can it be difficult to get to wherever you are?" Oh, it is. When I was working at Dorcas International Institute, which is in Providence, we were serving an immigrant and refugee population. One of the biggest places for them to be employed was at the hotels in Newport, Rhode Island, where everyone was so pleased to have folks who can speak a number of languages. The problem is, it takes 3 different buses to get there, and that's incredibly challenging for a job that doesn't pay all that much and isn't going to have you home to take care of your children.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. So I think that with us, the concern I have is making sure that there are enough artists of color being trained so that we can have the positions filled by folks who look like the kids who are coming to our program, because we are 53% BIPOC. The largest two groups that we have are people who self-identify as Latinx or as Black. And so it is important to us to try and have as diverse a staff as possible. I'm actually proud that among on 8 of us, we're, I think, 3 females, 3 cis females, 1 transgendered person, or a person who identifies as queer, um, 3 or 4 males at this point. Sorry, I'm like not even good with math either. And then and we represent 4 different generations, which makes me really excited too, because that's also important. Is If you're in a youth serving organization, you probably should have other than 40-year-olds running the show. It's all well and good to be like, but I consider myself a kid. Yeah, but you're not, Kristen.
Yeah, you have
You're
to come to
old.
terms. Yes, you have to come to terms with that.
Oh, it's funny though. The kids now are listening to the same music I grew up listening to, or listening to some of the music that I grew up
Right,
listening.
isn't that weird? I've had
Oh yeah.
it's all total side note. I have had a lot of moments where I see a kid at a bus stop wearing a Nirvana shirt, and I'm like, "What is going on? What is
Oh
happening?"
yeah. So we had a kid come in wearing a Pantera shirt, and I was just like, "Oh yeah, okay, Pantera." And they were like, "Wait a second, you liked them?" And I was like, "Well, no, actually, because they were too mainstream for me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I see you." And they're like, "Oh my god, now I have to change." So
That's so funny. Well, this is so in my conversations with different organizations, there's always a point where we talk about the board, and this is the first time that I've heard the notion of bringing youth on the board, but it makes a ton of sense for everything you just described. Obviously those that you serve, the youth in particular, right? Their representation on that board, it makes a ton of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense in regards to having local representation, because I have found some of the communities are at a level of isolation where the staff members like Sitka, Alaska, right? People have to be in Sitka, like they can't, they're not commuting in from somewhere else, that they have to be there. But in talking to Worm Farm Institute in Wisconsin, they're situated between Milwaukee and Chicago, and so their board members, a lot of them are situated in those surrounding communities, right? And actually, I will even say for Sitka, actually, they had board members that were also coming from the larger Alaskan community, right? So I think that's a really interesting notion of putting youth on the board and thinking about, it makes my wheels start to turn a little bit. My own organization has a lot of youth programs, and we've never thought of that, right? It just didn't occur to us, and it makes a lot of sense with the culture of what you've built too, right? Where there is a real diplomatic system and self sort of governing way that the teens are working, while they're there on site, that would really be transferable to board governance. It's really, maybe would be helpful actually to some of the adults in the room, as well, I would
yep.
imagine. It's a small board. I noticed that there's 7. Speak to me a little bit about that. Is that a size board that you're happy with? Do you want to see it increase? Do you want to see it get smaller? What are your sort of thoughts on the size of that group and how they're kind of operating for you?
Yeah, there were about 12, 13 people when I came on at Riverzedge, but a lot of them had been there for a while, and that was one in violation of the bylaws, and two, just they, quite frankly, I inherited an organization that wasn't super healthy, and so I think that people just were afraid to leave, and then they did, and then COVID came, and a lot of other folks had to depart. So at one point, like when I started, we had 12 people on the board, and they had, and I want to say it was like 75% BIPOC, and that was awesome. But again, most of the people had been there like 4 and 5 years, and so it was well past time for them to cycle off. But we had had trouble filling the spaces, and so people stayed. Okay, fair enough. So we've been really working at succession planning, but as you can imagine, during COVID, it became very challenging. People just didn't have time to do anything extra, and so we actually lost a few people then too. So we've got this great core group, of folks who are all comfortable with fundraising, because that was one thing too that I asked. I said, well, if you're not comfortable with fundraising at all in any way, and there's a menu of opportunities, but if you're not comfortable at all, then it's probably not the best place for you. So
Oh, yeah.
thanks, you know, because unfortunately, I think with a lot of youth development organizations, board get involved because they love kids
Yeah.
and they want to have a direct impact. And that's not the job of the board. The board's job is governance. And so, and my job is, if you will, like the sort of husbandry of the organization itself, right? And so my we've worked really hard, and we've brought in organizational consultants over the past few years so that we can get to the place we're at now. We're actually bringing 3 new people on next month, which I'm excited about, but they've all served already a year on a committee as volunteers. So that's what we've been doing, is making sure that people want it, and recognizing that if they're part of the organization for a while, it gives them a chance to see if it's something that they want to do, and that it gives them a chance to try out their skills and see if they like applying those skills. Sometimes you have a skill and you really don't want to use it at 7 p.m. That's okay. Um, so that's fine. So we've been able to bring on, like I said, a few more people, and I'm happy about that, because they did, like I said, they started on subcommittees and then transferred. We are interested, like I said, in bringing on youth, but I'm very well aware of the power dynamics involved in that, and so that's an issue, especially because you can't pay board members, and I hate asking youth to do something for free.
Oh, interesting. Right.
Yeah,
That right, because that's a core part of what you all do, and so that would disappear on that side.
exactly. So we would have to make sure that we were bringing on, on folks who didn't have a conflict of interest, so weren't currently in the program,
Mhm.
and that's fine. It's just a matter of like seeing how it would work. So in terms of am I satisfied with that? No. We're looking to have the board increase to about 12 to 15 people. The idea being that some number of them we hope will be youth, and some number of them will be parents. We just lost our last parent representative who had to step down for taking a new job, and it was just like too busy for her. So consequently, we're not exactly where I'd like to be, but we're getting there, which is nice, because I was really freaking out a couple of years ago when I first started, and everybody left, and I said, "Was it something I said?" And then people were like, "No, Kristen, it's because we're making strides and we're not in danger. Like we have no, like right now we're totally in the black. We have 3 months operating reserves. We don't have, we've increased our earned income, we've increased our retail presence, we've increased, and we don't have any debt." So that's awesome, but that's not where we were. When I got there, I was like, how am I making payroll? So so I think a lot of people just took the opportunity and said, okay, we're going to peace out now because it's been a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with where we are. We are getting back to where I'd like to be, which is 10, like I said, about 12 to 15 members. Don't want an unwieldy board. I don't like the idea of 30 people. I'm like, why would you need a board that's 3 times the size of your staff? I don't, because I'm not interested in a money board. We don't care about that. We ask everyone to make a donation. We want 100% board donation, but it can be $5, it can be $500, it can be $5,000. I'm not going after your network. I want you to. We have actually a shockingly loyal donor base. We did like one ask a year before I got to Riverzedge. It was the one thing. We sent out a little piece of paper and said, "Would you give?" In
Mhm.
December, and we have a 65% donor retention rate, which is like unheard of in
Wow, that's
the
fantastic.
nonprofit world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our people love us. And so consequently, that to me is awesome. Now my real like exciting goal, my thing is basically I want $1 from everybody in Woonsocket. It's a poor community, but if everybody gives us 50 cents or $1, I'll know we have community investment. Very important to me because that's very different than having a whole bunch of wealthy donors from elsewhere. When you take, I was just like I said, talking with someone the other day from a similar type nonprofit, and she was saying, there's a problem with the nonprofit structure, and the problem is that the top 1% of our population funds the absolutely poorest folks, and these folks never talk to each other, are never in the same room,
Nope.
and don't have any, no, there's no interface. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, 100%. So we're trying, and I think a lot of places are at this part. We're trying to reconceive what does governance look like for a youth serving organization that's committed to intersectionality, committed to looking at all the needs of our community. What does it look like? What should it look like? What's it allowed legally to look like? How close can we get to our vision?
Mhm.
So I feel like we're moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet, and it's probably going to take another couple of years, which is a bummer for me because I'm kind of an immediate gratification person. I'm like, we should be done yesterday because I've worked hard at
Yeah.
this, but that's okay. It'll take a bit.
Yeah, it's a long game, no doubt about it, and particularly with a board, right? And there's terms, and people have to.
Mm,
It takes a while.
yep,
You started to actually get into to my next question in regards to the financial makeup of the organization, and so obviously, in looking at GuideStar, and obviously the GuideStar can be a bit old and doesn't tell the whole story. But there's sort of three brackets for you guys of revenue generate. The way you generate revenue. There's the charitable side, which you've mentioned a bit. I know you all have been successful in grant acquisition. You mentioned earlier the NEA award. Um, how is there a makeup of that charitable giving? You have CVS headquartered there. I have no idea. They may not be philanthropically engaged at all. But is there a local business sector that is? I mean, you're obviously delving into workforce development. Maybe there's government support for that. Is there, what does that charitable breakdown look like for you all?
sure. Yeah, I know a lot of people are cagey about talking about funding. I don't care. It's kind of like when I was a college professor and people would be like, "Oh, don't share your syllabus." I'm like, why would I care if I share this? You're not me. You can't teach it. Like, you can teach the same stuff totally different way. No, we have. When I got to Riverzedge, we had two big grants. One was through the Rhode Island Department of Education, which was their flow through from the federal government, and that was for 21st century learning communities. So if you partner with the schools, then you can apply in conjunction with that school. In our case, it was Woonsocket High School, and we would be a 21st century learning site. We're not right now, but for about 10 years we were. Um, and so that was in relation to a program we started in 2012, which was expanded learning opportunities, where we worked with local mentors, schools, etc. RISD was one, Rhode Island School of Design, to provide credit remediation or credit earning opportunities to youth who are enrolled at Woonsocket High School. We're actually getting ready to reboot that program now, but it needed a refresher. It was started in 2012, and it was the first of its kind in the state of Rhode Island in 2012. But it's 2022 now, and the world is
Mhm.
different. So let's kick it in the butt a little bit. So that's what we're currently doing right now, is redesigning it with the Woonsocket Career and Tech Center. Um, so there's that. We also have significant funding through the Governor's Workforce Board, which is a subgroup of the Department of Labor and Training, and that is specifically for the reason that you mentioned, because we do workforce training. We're part of what's called the Real Skills for Youth program. Unfortunately, that funding is very much reliant on who is in office, and that funding is reliant on taxes generated by payroll. And so if people are out of work, if there's not a whole lot of payroll tax generated in the state, then that fund suffers. So that's been tough.
There's an irony to that. I'll just say really quickly that when you need workforce, that it would decrease. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense, but there it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So it's really frustrating. And I will tell you too, the state of Rhode Island is one of the only states that does no funding through the state for after school programming or out of school programming.
Mm.
which is a massive problem. The United Way has been doing a lot to try to change that. We did a lot of advocacy to try to change that. I was quite proud because we took our kids to the state house and they did a remarkable job.
Oh, nice.
Um, and we definitely had the sexiest posters because that's what we do. Which was nice. But so we do that. We will advocate for workforce funding and all of that. We recently received a large grant because the ARPA funds, which well the Recovery Act from COVID, that federal money got sent down to schools. Woonsocket has about 20% of its schools, which are Title One schools. We are considered a federal entitlement zone. In other words, the situation in Woonsocket is so important and so dire that a lot of funds from the federal government do not pass through the state of Rhode Island. They come directly into the city. That
Oh,
includes
wow.
community block development grants, and in this case, ARPA funds or whatever. So those came down. Those went to the Woonsocket Education Department. They took about 3% of the money that they had been given, which was the suggested amount, the suggested percentage from the federal government, and they invested that in community organizations. We were recognized actually. We formed the Woonsocket After School Coalition, about 5 or 6 different groups up here, including the Boys and Girls Club, the Connecting for Children and Families, the Community Care Alliance. There's a NeighborWorks, Blackstone Valley. We all got together and we put the Woonsocket After School Coalition together to go after that money. We lobbied the school department. We got the money, and so now that's part of our funding as well. And we were one of the very few groups, very few community-based organizational groups that were able to access those funds. So we're quite proud of that. We got a little award from the Rhode Island Foundation for that little that collaborative gesture.
Right.
Um, and so we're working on a couple of different things. One, I've been really trying to shift the lens in Woonsocket. Like I was saying, it's a small community. It's a small urban community. There's a number of us doing different things, but that are serving a similar population. And so my goal is to have all the community-based organizations play well together so that we can apply jointly for things, for large chunks of money. When I first came into Riverzedge, I said, for the first year, I'm not looking at anything under $5,000. I don't have time for that. Um, we've significantly increased we've doubled our operating budget from 400 to 800,000. So we're still like, we're not huge, but we're not tiny
No, that's
anymore.
that's fantastic though, to double the size
Um,
of the organization.
yeah, especially during a pandemic, I'm
Yeah.
I'm proud of that. Especially because it's not falsely inflated. It's not like, oh, well, you had PPP. No, that's all canceled. That's all off the books. We're legit 800 at this moment, and I expect us to stay that way, which is good. Because in terms of the way that we bring in funding, we're too dependent on federal and state. So I did look very closely at private foundations, and we've expanded that substantially. We've also expanded corporate sponsorship. You mentioned CVS. They did give a little bit more generously this year. I won't say the amount, but um, they're not super invested in the community-based orgs in Woonsocket.
Got
They describe ththemselves as a global corporation, not a local corporation. Fair enough. So that's that situation. But so we've moved on a lot to, like I said, going to corporate. We've got some friends in the corporate arena, and I've basically made it my business to get involved with the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce because it's really important to go and meet people. We met someone the other day, and it was a $10,000 conversation that a half an hour of our time. That's very much a good return on investment.
Absolutely.
So we're doing that, and we're really increasing our retail presence. Before we only sold our merch in 2 different places. Now we're selling them in 10, and it's located across the state. So that's really exciting.
Well, and
We've
I
also,
noticed too, the
yeah,
retail rate has very often like if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, like a Rhode Island's
yes.
local, right, a take too. So it has a lot of value.
Yeah, we specifically we try to do lines that are specific to Rhode Island history, to Woonsocket history. We take old vintage Woonsocket factory logos and taglines and all of that, and we try to use it to boost civic pride.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then I just of note, program services is listed too. So I assume that's the revenue that you're generating from what the students are providing
Yeah.
to the to the community, right? In
Yep.
regards to the work that they
Yep,
do.
absolutely. So that's the sort of private client and grant funded stuff. Anything that we do that someone actually gets a fee for service.
That's great. It was a super smart business model on lots of levels. So I think just as a final note, and I've really appreciated this on all kinds of levels. I always ask the guests just if if there was something that they wanted to share. If there's somebody out there, in a small community that looks similar to yours, trying to figure out right how to make it go. Um, in a smaller community, right? What advice might you give that individual from your perspective, what you've learned?
Well, the first thing I would say is, and this is a sort of a theater reference, do not rely on the kindness of strangers. Grants are all well and good, that's fine, but find a way to make money. Figure out what it is that you do. And this is, I honestly think this is the wave of the future for nonprofits, is making sure that there's a social enterprise component. I used to joke at my last place of employment that we should have, food trucks. And the reason I said that was because almost every immigrant and refugee who comes in, they have a vast number of skills, all from their various places around the world, and they're not always in demand when they resettle in Rhode Island. Fair
Right.
enough, but almost everybody, one of the things Rhode Islanders love is foods from around the world. And so that's actually where a lot of refugees and immigrants ended up making their money when they settled in Rhode Island, was in selling their food at local artist marts and things like that. So I was only half joking when I said, come on, let's create an LLC and let's have, food trucks that help feed the nonprofit. So I actually am currently researching that very idea of how complicated our taxes would be if we had a for-profit wing,
Hmm.
which would allow us a little bit of space to do some other things. If it's way complicated and it's just going to be hurtful, then that's going to take away from our ability to provide services to the youth, and so I'm not interested. But I would say always look at what you do. Ask. What I'm doing right now is looking at the organization, saying, what are you trying to accomplish? What are the programs that you want to make? How much do you need to do that? Okay, now we go to, what do you have that you're better at than anybody else? Can you train people? Can you sell it? What do you have that you can monetize? And remember to value who you are. Too much of what nonprofits do, and the people who are running nonprofits and working in nonprofits, they don't value their knowledge because society hasn't valued their knowledge. And we know that because they're not paid very well.
Hmm.
And so because of that, we have this sense of, we've internalized this sense of, oh, well, yeah, what I have is not really worthwhile. I'm not, a corporate financier or what have you. I'm not going to make the next Tesla. Well, first of all, you don't know that. And second of all, it's really, what we do is valuable. And if we didn't have these skills, governments wouldn't continue to outsource their welfare state business to us. So it's really important to make sure that you write down with your staff, what do you do well? What are you most proud of? Can you sell it?
That is great advice. And what I keep hearing over and over again, right, is that um, is some sort of focus, right, on legitimate, real value, right, that you provide, right, the community, right, and you all are just an excellent example on multiple fronts of providing value, right. There's obviously the value to the youth that are there, but then the work that they produce has value that stretches, beyond the activity itself that they're doing. So it's super impressive. And Kristen, I'm so thankful to you for spending time with me today talking about it. And well done, and bravo too on the growth of the organization. I mean, that's just super impressive. And in 3 years to get that level of work done is
We have
extremely.
a really good team. I'm very proud of us.
Well, that's a sign of a good leader too. When they follow up by saying that, you also know that they're a good leader. So, but Kristen, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and we're definitely take a look at the podcast notes for information on how to learn more about Riverzedge Arts, and check out what they're doing. And there's a lot to learn. So, Kristen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Small Town Big Arts. Remember to rate and review us and share with your friends. To learn more, visit us at smalltownbigarts.com. Until Until next time, I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirschner.